The spit was still glistening on Judge Judy's black robe when the entire courtroom realized what had just happened. For exactly 2 seconds, nobody moved. Not the bailiff, who would soon become the most watched law enforcement officer in America. Not the audience of retirees who'd paid for courtroom tickets, expecting a routine dress dispute. And not Chief Richard Walsh of the Maple Ridge Police Department, sitting front row in his press dress uniform, badge gleaming under studio lights, watching his only daughter commit the most expensive mistake of her 24-year-old life. 2 full seconds of frozen silence. Then the courtroom erupted. Brittany Walsh, designer-clad, perpetually smug, daddy's untouchable princess, had just spit directly onto a sitting judge on national television. And in exactly 30 seconds, cold steel handcuffs would close around her manicured wrists for the first time in a life carefully insulated from consequences by her father's uniform. By sundown that same day, the charges against Brittany Walsh would total 11. Battery on a judicial officer, assault, criminal contempt, and 8 more nobody, least of all Brittany, saw coming. By lunchtime the next day, her father's 28-year career as the most powerful man in Maple Ridge would be ash, and the police department he'd ruled like a private kingdom would face a federal investigation that would tear it apart from the inside, all of it. Every single piece of the destruction about to unfold, traced back to one moment of spoiled, entitled, unthinking arrogance from a young woman who'd spent her entire life believing her last name made her untouchable. She was about to learn, on camera, in front of millions, exactly how wrong she'd been. What Brittany didn't know was that this was never going to be a normal small claims case. 3 explosive revelations were about to detonate in that courtroom, one after another. Any one of them alone would have been enough to end the Walsh family's reign over Maple Ridge forever. The first. Brittany had walked in acting untouchable because she genuinely was, or at least had been, for years. 5 separate incidents, 5 buried files. 5 lives quietly ruined by a young woman who knew daddy's badge would clean up every mess. The second. Body cam footage had been hand-delivered to Judge Judy's office that very morning by an officer who'd finally reached his breaking point. Footage so damning prosecutors would later call it the most clear-cut case of police corruption they'd ever seen on tape. The third. A sealed manila envelope sitting on Judge Judy's bench right at that moment, containing a leaked internal affairs file that would end Chief Richard Walsh's career before the cameras stopped rolling. What Brittany didn't know was that Judge Judy had spent the entire weekend on the phone with the Maple Ridge County District Attorney, while Brittany had been at brunch Saturday posting mimosa selfies, while she'd been picking out the designer blouse she'd wear to court Sunday afternoon, while she'd been rehearsing the smug little speech she planned to deliver to that fake judge on that fake show. The woman in the black robe had been quietly assembling the most devastating ambush in the history of daytime television. By the time Brittany strutted into the courtroom Monday morning, chewing gum, AirPods in, rolling her eyes, every single trap had already been set. She just had to walk into them. And walk into them she did. Within 48 hours of the episode airing, the clip would hit 87 million views. Within a week, the entire Maple Ridge Police Department would be under federal investigation. Within a month, 3 states would be debating new laws, inspired directly by what was about to happen in that courtroom. And it all started with one entitled young woman who thought spitting at a TV judge would make her famous. She got famous, just not the way she planned. Twelofroom, smash that like button if you're ready to see what happens when a spoiled brat finally meets the one woman her father's badge can't protect her from. Subscribe, because what you're about to witness will restore your faith that justice, real justice, still exists in this country. To understand the magnitude of what was about to unfold, you need to know exactly who these 2 women were, and how their lives collided in the most painful way possible. Sarah Chin, at 58 years old, was the kind of woman this country quietly runs on and rarely thanks. She'd immigrated from a small village outside Guangzhou with her husband David 34 years ago, carrying 2 suitcases and $300 between them. She'd spent every single day since working harder than people half her age. 3 years before she ever heard the name Brittany Walsh, Sarah's husband David collapsed on the concrete floor of the auto repair shop where he'd worked for 26 years, dead of a massive heart attack before the ambulance reached the parking lot. 2 years before that, Her only daughter Jennifer had been found in a motel room outside Cleveland, gone forever from an overdose that had taken her piece by piece over 5 years. Sarah buried her daughter on a Tuesday, went back to work on Thursday, because there were 2 grandchildren who needed somebody to keep going. Lily was 8 years old now. Marcus was 11. They slept in the small second bedroom of Sarah's apartment. Twin beds pushed against opposite walls, a reading lamp between them, surrounded by drawings Lily had taped to the wallpaper, and the asthma inhaler Marcus kept in a plastic case on his nightstand. Sarah slept on the pull-out couch in the living room. She told the kids she actually preferred the couch, that her back felt better there, that the bedroom was theirs and only theirs, and that's the way it would stay. The truth? She could have afforded a 1-bedroom apartment on her own, but 2 children needed somewhere to feel like home. And a 58-year-old grandmother could sleep on a fold-out couch for as many years as it took. She worked double shifts at the Lakeside Diner 3 days a week, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., and she'd taken on a side job as a part-time alteration seamstress, doing hems and dry cleaning pickups for neighbors out of her living room. Because Marcus's asthma medication cost $240 a month, and the diner's insurance didn't cover it. For 3 years, she ran that little side business without a single complaint. 3 years. Hundreds of customers, neighbors who left Christmas cards and homemade cookies. 3 years. Until the morning Brittany Walsh banged on her door with a Versace cocktail dress and a demand. Brittany Walsh was in every single way that matters. The exact opposite of Sarah Chin. At 24 years old, she was a perpetual graduate student at the local state college. 6th year of what was supposed to be a 4-year degree. Every cent of her tuition paid by Daddy. Because Brittany had never been required to learn what a job actually was. She drove a white Range Rover with a Back the Blue decal in the rear window, not out of any respect for law enforcement, but because she'd figured out by age 19 that the decal was a kind of magic spell that made traffic tickets evaporate. She had the manicured nails of a woman who'd never washed a dish in her life, the designer handbag of a woman who'd never asked the price of anything, the practiced eye roll of someone who'd never once been told no by an authority figure, and the particular curled lip smirk of a young woman who knew the cop in the parking lot was on her father's payroll. She'd been arrested 3 times, twice for DUI, once for assaulting a bartender at a college bar. On all 3 occasions, the charges mysteriously evaporated within 48 hours. She was the kind of young woman who filmed herself crying at retail workers and uploaded the videos to TikTok with captions about being harassed by minimum wage employees. What Sarah didn't know, what no resident of Maple Ridge knew, was that Brittany Walsh had been the subject of 5 separate complaints to Internal Affairs over the past 3 years. 5 women, all working class, all Latina or Asian, all complaints quietly dismissed without investigation by officers, who reported directly to Chief Richard Walsh, and one young man whose name had appeared in a hospital report. Chief Walsh personally arranged to disappear before it ever reached a prosecutor's desk. Sarah Chin was about to become victim number 6, except this time, for the first time in 3 years, the trap the Walsh family had been running was finally going to spring shut on the wrong side. The dress arrived at Sarah's apartment on a Friday afternoon, a black Versace cocktail dress with a hem that needed to be taken up 2 inches before a sorority event the following night. 18-hour turnaround. Take it or leave it. Brittany dropped it on the kitchen counter without taking off her sunglasses. Sarah quoted her $40, already below her usual rate. She finished the alterations by 10 p.m. that night. The next morning, while transferring the finished dress from her ironing rack to the protective garment bag, a single drop of coffee from the mug on her counter splashed onto the hem, 1 pinhead-sized stain, smaller than a grain of rice, on the inside hem of a dress that retailed for $200 and was already 2 seasons old. Sarah called Brittany immediately, apologized 17 times, offered to pay for professional dry cleaning out of her own pocket, refund the entire alteration fee, and sew decorative beading over the spot at no charge. Brittany came to the apartment 40 minutes later. She did not accept the apology. She screamed at Sarah for 15 minutes, in front of Lily and Marcus, called her words a grandmother should never hear in her own home, and demanded $4,000 in cash on the spot when Sarah, shaking but firm, said the dress didn't cost $4,000, and she couldn't pay what she didn't owe. Brittany filed a small claims lawsuit the very next morning. And exactly 6 weeks later, that lawsuit landed Sarah Chin in Judge Judy's courtroom, sitting at the plaintiff's table, with a folder of receipts in her trembling hands, and her 2 grandchildren, watching the live taping from the studio audience, because Sarah had nobody to leave them with. Brittany walked into that courtroom with her father in the front row, his uniform crisp, his badge gleaming, his arms crossed like a man who'd never once watched his daughter face a consequence. He had no idea that the woman in the black robe had spent the previous Friday afternoon reading every single one of those buried complaints, and that the file sitting on the bench in front of her contained something that would end his career before the cameras stopped rolling. The courtroom that morning had the same electric hum it always carried before a taping. The kind of low, expectant buzz that came from an audience of retirees who'd been watching Judge Judy for 3 decades, and knew, the way regular viewers always knew, when something special was about to happen. The cameras were warm. The bailiff was at his post. Sarah Chin sat at the plaintiff's table in the simple navy blouse she'd pressed 3 times the night before, her folder of receipts and printed text messages, and a notarized statement from her downstairs neighbor, stacked neatly in front of her. Lily and Marcus sat in the second row of the studio audience, holding hands. Lily wore the small pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother in China. And then, Brittany Walsh walked in. She walked in chewing gum, loudly enough that the boom mic picked it up on the first sweep. She walked in wearing oversized designer sunglasses indoors, under the studio lights. She walked in already scrolling her phone, thumbs flying across the screen, not even bothering to look at the bench she was about to stand in front of. The bailiff asked her once, politely, to put the phone away. She held up a single manicured finger without looking up. He asked her a second time more firmly. She sighed audibly and kept typing. He had to ask her a third time, his voice now carrying the edge regular viewers recognized as the last warning before something very bad happened. Before Brittany finally rolled her eyes, slid the phone into her designer handbag, and looked up just in time to see Judge Judy enter the courtroom. Judge Judy did not say anything about the phone. She didn't have to. Her opening questions, as always, were deceptively gentle, almost conversational, the kind of soft prosecutorial probing that had been disarming defendants for 35 years. She asked Brittany to walk her through what had happened with the dress. Calmly, in her own words, Brittany sighed before she answered. The kind of theatrical sigh meant to communicate to the entire room that this whole proceeding was beneath her. She did not refer to Sarah by name. She called her that woman. She called her the seamstress. At one point, when describing the moment she'd been informed about the coffee stain, she actually used the phrase, that lady people. Sarah, sitting at the plaintiff's table, kept her eyes down and her hands folded. When she was given her chance to speak, she explained the accident in a soft, careful voice, describing the single drop, the immediate phone call, the offers of compensation. Brittany rolled her eyes so hard her entire head moved with them. When Sarah, voice trembling, mentioned that her grandchildren had been in the apartment when Brittany came back screaming, Brittany actually laughed out loud, a short, sharp, contemptuous laugh that carried clearly across the silent courtroom and was caught by every microphone in the room. The audience reaction was immediate and audible. Gasps rippled through the rows. A woman in the front row, gray-haired, in a cardigan, shook her head slowly with the kind of disgust only a grandmother can fully express. A man 2 seats over crossed his arms and muttered something under his breath the cameras didn't catch, but the people around him heard clearly. The audience's audible disapproval only seemed to fuel Brittany's sense of superiority. She straightened her posture, tossed her hair, glanced toward her father in the front row and gave him the smallest, smugest smile, a smile that said, "Watch this, Daddy. I've got this." Chief Richard Walsh smiled back, nodded approvingly, even gave her a small, almost imperceptible thumbs up. He'd watched her get away with everything her entire life. He saw no reason today was going to be any different. The first true detonation came when Judge Judy asked Brittany to clarify the $4,000 demand. The receipt Sarah had submitted showed clearly that the dress had retailed for $1,202 years earlier, and that it was already a season-old style. Judge Judy held up the receipt. She asked, with the slow, precise diction of a woman who already knew the answer, where exactly the $4,000 figure had come from. Brittany sighed again, even more theatrically this time. She tilted her head. She gave Judge Judy the look she gave Starbucks employees who didn't get her latte right. And then she said the words the entire audience would later remember, as the moment they collectively decided this young woman deserved everything that was coming to her. "Look," she said, "I don't know if you understand how Versace pricing works. My dad's a police chief. We don't shop where you shop." The gasps from the audience were so loud the boom operator had to lower the levels. The grandmother in the cardigan put a hand to her mouth. Sarah Chin actually flinched at the plaintiff's table. And Judge Judy, calm as a winter pond, allowed the smallest possible smile to appear at the corner of her mouth. The one regular viewers had seen 1,000 times and recognized instantly, the smile that meant somebody was about to be destroyed. Sarah's testimony, when Judge Judy invited her to finish, was the kind of quiet heartbreak no entitled young woman in designer sunglasses could possibly compete with. She described, voice cracking, how Brittany had come back to her apartment building 3 nights in a row after the lawsuit was filed. How she'd stood in the hallway outside Sarah's door at 11 p.m., screaming, banging, demanding to be let in. How on the 3rd night, Marcus had woken up in tears, and his asthma had triggered, and Sarah had spent the night in the emergency room with her grandson on a nebulizer. She described how Brittany had filmed those visits and posted them on TikTok, with captions calling Sarah a thief and a scammer, with Sarah's apartment number and street name visible in the background of the footage. How for 2 weeks afterward, Sarah had received harassing phone calls and text messages from strangers. How Lily had asked her one morning over breakfast why people on the internet hated Grandma. Judge Judy turned to Brittany. She asked, in that same deceptively gentle voice, whether Brittany would like to explain the videos. Brittany did not even hesitate. "Free speech, Your Honor," she said with a small smirk. Maybe if she did her job right, she wouldn't be on the internet. The audience reaction was a sound somewhere between a gasp and a growl. Sarah lowered her head. Lily, in the 2nd row, started to cry quietly, and Marcus, 11 years old, put his arm around his little sister, with the seriousness of a boy who'd been forced to grow up too fast. And Judge Judy, very slowly, very deliberately, picked up her pen, looked down at the yellow legal pad in front of her, and made a small note that no camera caught and no audience member noticed. But in that single moment, in that single line of writing on that single yellow page, a routine $400 small claims case had quietly been transformed into something else entirely. Chief Walsh, in the front row, was still smiling. If you're already loving how Judge Judy is letting this entitled brat hang herself, smash that like button and tell me in the comments. Should the children of police officers face the same consequences as everyone else? Or is it time we ended the special treatment for good? Judge Judy did not raise her voice. She simply lifted the folder Sarah Chin had submitted into evidence and began laying its contents on the bench, one piece at a time, with the unhurried precision of a woman who'd already won the case, and was now simply walking the audience through the proof, the photograph of the dress hanging on Sarah's ironing rack, the pinhead-sized coffee stain barely visible without magnification, the retail receipt showing the dress had originally sold for $200 2 seasons earlier, and then the photograph that detonated the entire case. A screenshot from Brittany Walsh's own Instagram, posted 2 days before she'd ever dropped the dress off at Sarah's apartment, showing Brittany at a charity gala wearing the exact same Versace dress, posing with a champagne flute and a caption that read, "Living my best life." The dress had already been worn. Brittany had been trying to scam free alterations on a dress she'd already used in public. Judge Judy looked up from the folder. Her voice carried across the courtroom with the calm finality of a woman delivering a sentence she'd already written. "Miss Walsh," she said, "you didn't bring a damaged dress into my courtroom today. You brought a scam, and you tried to use this court to make a working grandmother pay for it." Brittany's mask slipped for the first time. The smug little smile collapsed. The shoulders that had been thrown back in confidence hunched forward. She slammed her hand on the podium so hard the microphone popped. She accused Sarah of lying. She accused Judge Judy of being biased against her. She turned and looked at her father in the front row, expecting the familiar instant backup, the look that had bailed her out of every consequence of her entire life, and Chief Richard Walsh, for the first time in 24 years of parenting, did not react fast enough. He hesitated, just for a second, just long enough for the audience to see it, just long enough for Brittany to see it too. Something inside her, a lifetime of unchallenged entitlement, finally cracked the wrong way. She turned back to Judge Judy and started shouting. "You're a fake judge on a fake show," she screamed. "My dad runs the police in our town. You think you're better than me? You think this matters?" Judge Judy did not blink. Calm as still water, she said. "Miss Walsh, I'm going to give you one chance to apologize to Mrs. Chin and to this court. One chance." Brittany took one step forward. She leaned across the podium, and she spit not on the floor, on Judge Judy's robe, a clear, deliberate, contemptuous act, caught from 4 camera angles simultaneously. The courtroom went dead silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then everything happened at once. The bailiff moved before anyone else in the room had even processed what they'd just witnessed. Judge Judy stood, slowly, deliberately, the saliva still glistening on the dark fabric of her robe, her face carrying the kind of cold composure that only comes from a woman who's been waiting for this exact moment all weekend. The audience erupted in a wave of gasps and shouted disbelief. Chief Walsh was on his feet, but a court security officer was already in front of him, blocking his path to the podium with a hand raised in unmistakable warning. And Judge Judy, voice level, surgical, devastating, spoke the sentence that ended Brittany Walsh's freedom. "Officer," she said, "place Miss Walsh under arrest, battery on a sitting judge. Assault, criminal contempt, take her into custody right now." Brittany laughed, actually laughed because in 24 years of life it had never once been real. "You can't arrest me," she said. The laugh hollow and cracking at the edges. "My dad is right there, Dad. Dad, tell her." She turned toward the front row with the desperate confidence of a child who'd never once needed a backup plan. And what she saw on her father's face was the moment her entire world ended. Chief Richard Walsh, 28-year veteran of the Maple Ridge Police Department, the man who'd made every consequence of her life evaporate before it touched her, was standing absolutely still. The color had drained from his face in slow, sickening stages like watercolor running off a page. His mouth was open but no sound came out. His hands hung at his sides. Useless. He was looking at his daughter the way a man looks at a building, collapsing in real time, knowing there's nothing left in the world he can do to stop it. The cuffs closed around Brittany's wrists at the 30-second mark, and then Judge Judy looked directly at Chief Walsh, lifted a thick sealed envelope from her bench, and said the 8 words that would destroy a 28-year career in less than 5 minutes. "Chief Walsh, we need to talk about your daughter." She opened the envelope. Inside was a leaked copy of the Maple Ridge Internal Affairs file on Brittany Walsh, hand-delivered to her chambers the previous Friday afternoon by a courier whose name had been carefully kept out of the paperwork. Judge Judy did not rush. She walked through the contents with surgical precision, one piece at a time, each reveal landing harder than the last. "3 years ago," she said, "your daughter struck a 19-year-old college student named Tyler Brennan with her white Range Rover in a parking lot outside the Maple Ridge Galleria. Tyler suffered a fractured pelvis and required 2 surgeries. His medical bills came to $87,000. The police report, Chief Walsh, was filed by an officer who reports directly to you. The driver was listed as unknown. The Walsh family settled out of court for an NDA and a payment of $12,000. Tyler Brennan still walks with a permanent limp." The audience let out a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite a moan. Sarah Chin, at the plaintiff's table, lifted a hand to her mouth. 2 years ago, Judge Judy continued, your daughter was arrested for driving under the influence after blowing a .19, well over twice the legal limit. The arresting officer was a young patrolman named Officer James Reyes. 3 years on the force. No prior reprimands. Within 1 week of that arrest, Officer Reyes was reassigned to overnight patrol in the worst district of Maple Ridge. The breathalyzer results from your daughter's arrest were lost before the case ever reached the prosecutor's desk. Chief Walsh's mouth was still open. He had not blinked in nearly a minute. I have here, Judge Judy said, the names of 5 women who filed harassment complaints against your daughter over the past 3 years. 5 women. Every single complaint was marked unsubstantiated and closed within 72 hours. She read the names aloud, slowly, one at a time, letting each name hang in the air long enough to land. Maria Hernandez, a 34-year-old hotel housekeeper. Lynn Wynn, a 19-year-old nail technician Speranza Rivera, a 51-year-old grocery cashier, Minji Park, a 28-year-old waitress, and Carmen Diaz, a 46-year-old daycare worker. 5 women, Judge Judy said, every single one working class, every single one Latina or Asian, every single one ignored by your department, Chief Walsh. Sarah Chin began to cry quietly into her folded hands, not for herself, for them. And then Judge Judy said, picking up a small black flash drive between 2 fingers and holding it up to the cameras, "There is this. 6 months ago, your daughter was pulled over for running a red light at the intersection of Maple and 5th. The traffic stop was recorded on body cam. On that footage, your daughter is heard saying to the officer, and I am quoting directly, 'Do you know who my father is? He'll have your job by tomorrow if you write this ticket.' The officer did not write the ticket. That officer, Chief Walsh, is now a rookie trainee in dispatch. This footage," Judge Judy said, "was sent to me Friday afternoon by another officer in your department. He attached a note. I'm going to read it aloud." She unfolded a single sheet of paper. He wrote, "I can't do this anymore. I joined this job to protect people, not the chief's daughter." The courtroom was so silent you could hear the studio lights humming. Chief Walsh's face was the color of paper. He had aged 10 years in 5 minutes. "Mrs. Chin," Judge Judy said, turning gently toward the plaintiff's table, "this case stopped being about a $400 dress the moment I opened that file on Friday afternoon. This case is now about a young woman who has been allowed to harm people for 3 years because her father wears a uniform, and it's about a police chief who confused his badge with a license to break the law. Both of those things end today." She turned to the bailiff. "This footage and this file," she said, "are being released to the State Attorney General's office at the conclusion of this taping. Federal investigators have already been notified. I am awarding Mrs. Chin $5,000 in damages for emotional distress, attorney's costs, and the stalking incidents at her home. But more importantly, I am ordering this entire transcript and the accompanying evidence to be entered into the public record." Brittany finally broke, not crying, wailing. The kind of ugly, snot and mascara wailing that comes from a person facing actual consequences for the very first time in their adult life. She begged her father to do something. "Daddy, please," she sobbed. "Daddy, please, Daddy." Chief Walsh did not move. He could not. He knew it was over. Her perfectly contoured makeup was running in dark streaks down her face. Her designer blouse was stained with tears and saliva. Her manicured hands were shaking against the cold steel of the handcuffs. The young woman who'd walked into the courtroom 47 minutes earlier, acting like she owned the world, now looked exactly like what she'd always been, underneath all of it. A scared 24-year-old who had finally, mercifully, run out of people to hide behind. The clip went live at 3:47 p.m. Eastern Time. And within 90 minutes, it was no longer just a courtroom moment, it was a national event. The 30-second sequence of Brittany Walsh, leaning over the podium, and spitting on Judge Judy hit TikTok first. Uploaded by a teenage viewer who'd been watching the live taping with her grandmother. By 6 p.m. that evening, the clip had crossed 8 million views. By midnight, it had crossed 30 million. Within 72 hours, the video had hit 87 million views across every major platform, making it the most viewed courtroom moment in the entire history of the internet, surpassing every previous Judge Judy viral clip combined. The hashtag #NoBadgeAboveTheLaw trended for 9 consecutive days on Twitter. Reddit threads in Art Permastered Freakout broke past 240,000 upvotes within the first 48 hours, and the body cam footage clip, the one in which Brittany had told the patrol officer her father would have his job by tomorrow, went viral as a separate moment all on its own, racking up 31 million views as a standalone video, and becoming the textbook example in classrooms across the country of exactly what police corruption sounds like when it's caught on tape. TikTok responded with an avalanche. Over 4,000 reaction videos were posted within the first week. Veterans filmed themselves watching the clip in tears. Working mothers paused mid-cooking to record their reactions. And most importantly of all, retired and active police officers came forward in droves to denounce what Chief Walsh had done. This mattered. And it mattered enormously, because it meant the loudest voices condemning the Walsh family were the very people whose profession Walsh had spent 28 years tarnishing from the inside. One reaction video in particular hit the cultural nervous system with unusual force. It was filmed by a former Maple Ridge officer named Daniel Cortez, a 12-year veteran who'd been forced to resign 3 years earlier after refusing to bury one of Brittany's incidents. He sat in his garage in his old patrol jacket, no makeup, no edits, and simply talked for 9 minutes about what it had felt like to choose between his career and his conscience, and how he'd been quietly waiting 3 years for the day the truth came out. That single reaction video crossed 22 million views in 5 days, and was eventually shown on Good Morning America, NBC Nightly News, and 3 different congressional hearings. Twitter became a battlefield of accountability. The ACLU shared the case. The NAACP shared it. Civil rights organizations across the country picked up the body cam clip and ran with it. State legislators in 14 different states retweeted the video alongside demands for reform legislation. And one by one, over the following 2 weeks, the 5 women whose harassment complaints had been buried by the Maple Ridge PD came forward publicly. Maria Hernandez first, with a tearful video posted from her break room at the hotel. Then Lynn Wynn, who'd been too afraid to speak for 3 years. Then Esperanza Rivera. Then Minji Park. Then Carmen Diaz. Each one telling her story. Each one validated for the first time by a country that had finally chosen to listen. Their faces appeared together on the cover of Time magazine 3 months later under the single-word headline, "Heard." Facebook produced the most quietly miraculous response of all. A GoFundMe campaign for Sarah Chin was started the night the episode aired by a complete stranger, a single mother in Minnesota named Rebecca Lindholm, who'd simply written in the description, "This woman is everybody's grandmother, and we're going to take care of her." The campaign reached $100,000 in 24 hours. By day 3, it had crossed $200,000. By day 5, it stood at $340,000 from over 47,000 individual donors. Sarah, when she was finally shown the total, sat down on her pull-out couch and cried for the first time since her husband had died 3 years earlier. She paid off every cent of her medical debt. She set up college funds for Lily and Marcus, and she donated the largest portion of what remained to a newly created legal aid fund for working-class women facing harassment from people more powerful than themselves. Reddit did what Reddit does best. Within 72 hours, amateur investigators in our Unresolved Mysteries had connected Tyler Brennan's 3-year-old hit-and-run to the Walsh case, using nothing more than public court records, hospital reports, and a parking lot security tape that had been quietly archived by a local business owner, Tyler. Now 22 years old and walking with a permanent limp that would never fully go away, saw his story go national. He filed a civil suit against Brittany Walsh and the city of Maple Ridge within 10 days of the episode airing. He won that suit 8 months later. The judgment was for $1.8 million. Tyler used a portion of it to pay off his student loans, a portion to start a scholarship fund for working-class students at his community college, and the rest, he said, simply to live the life someone else had tried to take from him. The legal consequences for Brittany Walsh stacked up with brutal speed. By sundown of the day the episode aired, 11 separate charges had been formally filed against her: battery on a judicial officer, a felony, criminal contempt of court, assault, and 8 more charges filed by the state attorney general's office over the following 2 weeks, including a refiled hit-and-run charge for the Tyler Brennan case, evidence tampering, and witness intimidation. 6 months later, Brittany Walsh stood in a state criminal courtroom, this time without designer sunglasses, without a smirk, and without a father in the audience to bail her out. She was sentenced to 4 years in state prison. The consequences for Chief Richard Walsh moved faster and hit harder. He was placed on administrative leave within 48 hours of the episode airing. The federal investigation that opened that same week reopened all 5 of the buried harassment complaints. Every single one of them was substantiated within 30 days. He was indicted on charges of obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and abuse of office. He resigned in disgrace before the trial began, his 28-year career ending with a single sheet of paper he signed alone in his empty office at 3 a.m. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. His pension was forfeited entirely. The Maple Ridge Police Department itself was placed under a federal consent decree, mandating top-to-bottom retraining, an independent civilian oversight board, and the indictment of 3 additional officers who'd played roles in burying the prior incidents. The city council appointed a new chief a black woman named Captain Angela Morris, who'd been quietly passed over for promotion 3 separate times during the Walsh years. Sarah Chin was featured on Good Morning America. She was awarded the State Citizen Courage recognition. She spoke at a state Senate hearing on civilian oversight of police, her hands shaking slightly, but her voice never wavering. Lily and Marcus, in every single interview they gave, started with the same line: "Grandma is the bravest person we know." And in the small detail that hit every single viewer in the chest, like a quiet punch, Sarah Chin still went to work at the Lakeside Diner. She refused to quit. She said the diner was where her late husband used to bring her lunch on his break. And she wasn't going to let one bad day take that from her too. Within 6 months, 3 states had passed legislation that newspapers and reformers came to call Chin's Law, requiring independent civilian review boards for any complaint involving an officer's immediate family member. The case became a textbook example in police academy ethics courses across the country. Judge Judy was invited to speak at 3 separate congressional hearings on accountability and reform. No badge, no last name, no father's title can protect a person forever from their own choices. Brittany Walsh spent 24 years believing consequences were something that happened to other people. It took her 30 seconds to learn she was wrong. This case was never really about a $400 address. It was about every working grandmother who's ever been screamed at by an entitled customer, every Tyler Brennan whose injury was made to disappear, every working-class woman whose voice was buried under a uniform. Sarah Chin didn't just win her own case that day. She won theirs too. The real heroes of this story are not the lawyers, not the cameras, not even Judge Judy. The real heroes are the grandmothers, the widows, the working women who go to bed exhausted and still wake up and do the right thing. This country runs on women like Sarah Chin. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Tell me in the comments, was 4 years enough for Brittany? God bless Sarah Chin.